Welcome to the EW Podcast. I'm your host, Eric White. Today, I have the pleasure of sharing a conversation I recently had with two of the minds behind the new documentary, Better Left Unsaid. Today, I'm joined by director Curt Jaimungal and producer Desh Amila. For a description of this documentary, here's what's available in the iTunes Store. The premise behind Better Left Unsaid lies in the unconfined analysis of the often violent extremism of today's Western political landscape. As liberal democracy becomes increasingly challenged in the West, we expose the dangerous tactics employed by the radical left and far right alike. In a world where political polarization frames the way in which we live, a new path forward of unity is needed more than ever before. The value of the film lies in its impact, brevity, and digestibility as we confront the philosophical underpinnings of the radical left and their extreme right counterpart. So that's what's available on the iTunes Store. In my own words, I would say that the film is a critique of extremist movements, both left and right, with a particular focus on the extreme left. Better Left Unsaid was, to me, one part modern socio-political analysis and one part history lesson. I start this conversation with Desh and Curt by discussing the motivations that led to the creation of the film, including Curt's natural curiosity when it comes to difficult topics, and Desh's experience living in Sri Lanka during a civil war. At one point around the halfway mark, we do get a little sidetracked with a conversation about race and racism. In retrospect, I do feel some regret for not spending that time getting into more specifics about the film, but I also do believe that this part of the conversation is an interesting model for how two people can have a disagreement about a difficult topic without things getting heated. Plus, this section will give listeners insight into how these two gentlemen think. We end the episode by returning to the film, including a discussion on the effects the documentary is likely to have on viewers. Better Left Unsaid is available for pre-order today, and I highly recommend giving it a watch. The analysis of modern extremism and the exploration of how we got here is invaluable and really necessary viewing. You'll find a link to the documentary in the notes for this episode. In addition to Better Left Unsaid, Desh has previously worked on another excellent documentary called Islam and the Future of Tolerance, which features Maajid Nawaz and Sam Harris. And Curt hosts a podcast called Theories of Everything, where he has deep and thought-provoking conversations with people like Noam Chomsky, Janice Fiamengo, Eric Weinstein, and many more. Both Curt and Desh exemplify the qualities of curiosity, honesty, and compassion that I try to cultivate in myself. And it really was an honor getting to spend this hour with them. I definitely recommend checking out their previous work once you've watched Better Left Unsaid, and you can do so by visiting the links in the notes for this episode. Without further ado, here is the trailer for the new film Better Left Unsaid, followed by my conversation with director Curt Jaimungal and producer Desh Amila.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
You're a white male!
You're white, you're still responsible!
The world is upside down. I thought the whole idea was to not judge people by their skin color.
That's what racism used to mean.
I can no longer teach contemporary moral problem. Anything that involved issues of race and gender seems to me a minefield.
Racism's been redefined. Sexism's been redefined.
This is all through the culture.
And if we can't talk, what's left?
I'm not a Nazi.
Why are we not taught the historical consequences of those who viewed the world through optics of groups that have power and groups that don't?
Is this not the central problem of our time?
All right. right, so I'm here with Desh Amila and Curt Jaimungal to talk about their new documentary film, Better Left Unsaid. Thanks for joining me, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Great pronunciation on my last name.
Was it?
Did you look that up?
I watched a video where someone said it, and yeah. I didn't want to mess it up. That was the one thing I was sweating coming into this. I was like, I don't want to start off with a mispronunciation.
Great job.
I appreciate you guys coming on and talking to me today about this documentary. I've watched it twice since having it passed along. I must admit, the first time it gave me some pretty bad anxiety. I was like, oh my God, this is, it's an intense topic, and it's one that I think, it's been gaining a lot of attention especially in the past year with BLM and Antifa rioting in the US. But it seems to me that the issue isn't trying to convert the people who rioted in Portland for months. It's more so there's this group of people, I think, who don't really know which way to go with things. They don't recognize themselves in Antifa. They don't recognize themselves in anarchy, but then they don't hold alt-right views either. And so I think there's a lot of fear with people wanting to stand up to this and not knowing how to respond. And I just appreciate what this documentary does.
Yeah, thank you.
So maybe we can just start off with why you guys made the documentary. I know, Curt, you're a filmmaker. You have some previous experience in the Toronto film scene, I believe. And Desh, you have an interesting story coming from Sri Lanka and also founding This Is 42. So maybe we can just go one after the other with a little background about the key points in your life that made you to make a film that's very critical of extremism.
Well, I'll go first then. I like ideas. I like mentation. So if you think of my documentary or this documentary as ideation, essentially, how do you relate different ideas together? How do you play with them? What constitutes the left? What constitutes extremism on the left? What constitutes extremism on the right? They're abstract topics. I like puzzles. I like math. I like physics. So this is a tough topic. It's a tough one to crack. And it's extremely important. It's extremely exigent for our culture right now because, as you see with BLM and the Capitol riots, they're all born of something. Both extremes are born of the same baby. You can think of that. So then this is what is the analysis of that baby?
I tell the story of my interest in these quote unquote challenging / controversial subject matter. It comes from, for me personally, for 19 years of my life, I was born and lived in a country during the Civil War. When people talk about a civil war as a hypothetical scenario and what could happen, I witnessed all that. So coming to the West and being empowered by Enlightenment values and the freedoms the West brings, and the ability for an individual to do things, say things, that I don't for a second take for granted. So about 10 years ago, I started getting interested in intellectual philosophical subject matter. So I used to run one of the largest intellectual touring companies in Australia. And we specifically wanted to make sure that we ran certain type of events to get the wider public talking. And that's been a passion of mine. I made a film a couple of years ago called Islam and the Future of Tolerance, which was my first film. It's a documentary feature talking about a very complex subject matter. And when Curt approached me about a year ago with the concept for Better Left Unsaid, it is a natural fit because I am attracted to these vexing issues of society. And I feel as we have a certain amount of responsibility, and some of us have the ability to and resources to do things that others may not. So this particular subject matter, seeing where the politics of the West is going, I was quite worried about this. So when the film landed on my lap, it's a film that needs to be made and seen.
Yeah. Yeah, Desh, I remember when Islam and the Future of Tolerance came out, and I somehow missed it, and I was reminded of it, kind of doing a little looking into you, and had the chance to watch that before our interview. And yeah, it's another great film, and I think that there's some interesting common threads between that and the documentary Better Left Unsaid that maybe we can explore a little bit. But it sounds like to me, both of you gentlemen, well, maybe there is a little difference in your approach to this. Desh, you come from having an experience in a war-torn country, and not wanting to see that in the West. And Curt, it sounds like you just like the challenge of solving hard problems and figuring out what is a solution to them. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's also to sort out my own thoughts. So if you watch people like Peterson or Shapiro or even Coleman Hughes, you get the idea. Well, you start to think that their ideas are your ideas, and they start to spout off what they're saying as if it's your own. And I noticed that in myself, and I wanted to know, why do I think what I think, and is what I'm saying true? So let me investigate it. Let me sort out the wheat from the chaff, and part of that is this film.
Let's get into
for me. Go ahead. For me, I agree with your point. It is. I have enormous respect for what the West has given me. I'm constantly grateful for what I have. I personally think is an extraordinarily lucky life right now, and I constantly talk to my family who are still in Sri Lanka, and just seeing the amount of talent that is in a country like Sri Lanka, but also seeing the lack of opportunity they have purely because of structural reasons and how the country is. So for me, seeing some of the mistakes that led to it's a country like Sri Lanka staying at the place where it is, and seeing some of that replicated here, and people not really realizing what are they saying, what's the implication of those things, that really gets to me. And I like to figure out a way to tackle that. And I am a big believer in having great conversations and being able to talk about anything. We should be able to talk about anything, not necessarily about the person who's holding the idea, but rather the idea itself. So I hope I answered your question around that way.
Absolutely. No, and I to kind of tie both of your answers together, just a quick little context about me and my interest in this topic. Last year after the death of George Floyd, I was one of the people here in San Diego who was out in the streets protesting. I marched with BLM 5 separate occasions, I believe. And there were times in the protest where things would be chanted that made me feel uncomfortable. But I wasn't.
For example?
Silence is violence is a great example. But there was kind of this feeling of like, we're all out here together, where we all saw this injustice happen and we want to see change. And I didn't really think too critically about what I was doing. And then on the final day of that protest, we were walking back from this area of town called North Park, and there was this young girl, she must have been 20 years old, white girl, yelling at a police officer in the middle of the road who was blocking traffic for us and just shaming him, walking by, looking back over her shoulder to yell at him more. And that was kind of the moment where I was like, what am I doing here? This can't be right. How can a film like this, who is it trying to reach? Was I accurate in my assessment earlier of saying that it's maybe most effective to try to reach people who are undecided, or is this trying to reach people who are rioting?
Firstly, congratulations, man. It's not easy at all to be a part of a movement like that and then leave. and see what's wrong with it or see what's right with it, even from an objective point of view, if you can call it objective. That's not easy. As for who this movie is for, yeah, you're right. It's not for the people who feel like they've already decided, that is, they're on the extreme left or the extreme right. It's generally for the people in the center left, center right. As Desh might say, it's for people who care about conversations.
Reality is, I know the loudest microphone is generally with the extreme, but Steven Pinker has shown it time and time again. If you look at the data sets, you'll see they are such a vocal minority nonetheless, but they then influence policy because they are so vocal. And this movie, for me, is to make sure that the largest voting bloc, who are moderates, they may have some movement and left to the right, but they're generally in the middle. We want to speak to them, because once they have the bits and pieces information that they may be missing, and that is generally the case, they know one part of the narrative, they're missing the other part. So once they have a more complete picture, then they become they can be more vocal, and they can then influence policy when they have the opportunity to vote next time around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, that was definitely true for me. I didn't have all the information, and once I saw that what was going on maybe wasn't right, I was able to seek it out. And luckily, there's people like Coleman Hughes, who was mentioned earlier, who has been very vocal about the shortcomings of BLM.
Eric, I have a question for you, a quick one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned anxiety before. I did too. I mentioned that I'm nervous. I'm not nervous for this. Well, I am a tiny bit, but there's something else on my mind. So I'm calming myself with some hot water.
Nice.
But your anxiety, you mentioned that you had some trepidation with the film, and I'm wondering, what was that about?
Yeah, so it was mostly in my first viewing of it. I have a tendency to really take things to worst case scenario. And so I was seeing, the first half of the movie, you kind of lay out all of it's more of an educational thing in the first half, where you're showing what is going on. You're providing definitions to terms, and I'm seeing the nonsense, and I can feel the anxiety building. But where it really peaked was whenever you gave a look back into past examples of communism. And that one shook me, because that kind of, you can talk about what's going on the left and show examples of them maybe being a little unreasonable. But then whenever you extrapolate that out and show where that goes, it's a really frightening thing. And that, I don't know, that really gave me anxiety. That was really where it kind of peaked for me.
Cool.
Is that on purpose?
Definitely. Well, partly, let's say.
Okay.
Just so you know, you might have this as a first for your podcast. The documentary started as an exposition into communism and its roots, because I asked a forum, I'm like, is there any documentary that talks about communism and what happened? Because I don't know anything about what happened in Mao's China or Soviet Russia. And someone said, there isn't, that's not propagandistic, like by the American government or pro-communism. So I was like, okay, how about if I create that? And then someone said, hey, I'll donate if you did a crowdfunding campaign to that. So then I thought, well, okay, how can I expand this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought it was extremely useful. I was familiar with some Russian examples, but a lot of the other examples that you provided in the documentary were new to me. And I also appreciated how you showed what happens when the far right goes out of control. And you do spend some time talking about the right-wing extremists. But some of the listeners might be wondering, why make a movie about the extreme left whenever the extreme right seems to be a threat as well? I don't know if it's equal or greater, but why focus the movie on the left and not the right?
Well, the way to answer that is identifying far-right extremism isn't that difficult, because their entire worldview is based on racial superiority, and that identification and everything that comes on the back of that is people seem to understand it quite easily whenever it happens. And there is a real argument. The data shows in America there is a pretty sizable increase of far-right extremism. But that's not a new thing. That has been brewing for a while. When I was making Islam and the Future of Tolerance, that data was available back then as well. The rise of the far right is not a new thing, but it has been brewing in the background. But the reason that we are looking at the left, or the furthest of the left, is what's happening right now in the last few years, that some of the ideas from the furthest of the left has made it to mainstream, and people who should know, whether it's Hollywood actors, musicians, influencers, are spouting them out like these are new ideas, these are progressive, great ideas, these are great for Western democracies. But they're not really understanding where these ideas came from, and the fact that we have had this experience or experiment in the past. So what we're trying to do is just examine that. This is not to diminish. I mean, this is, as we know we're going to get this accusation, far right is far more dangerous. We're not diminishing any of that. But we also want to talk about this other thing, because Curt mentions this in the movie. The far left's approach is rather philosophical, and it has this allure of it's an academic approach. It feels very appealing. It feels like it's going to people's intellect, and everything that comes from it is for the betterment of humanity, coming from a rational intellectual point of view. But some of them, it may sound like that, but it isn't really based on any logical reason. So we just want to examine that and present this bit of information so people can have conversations about this and examine certain claims made by the far left.
Additionally, the far right is called reactionary for a reason. They react. And that is, if you pose the extreme left to them, they're going to react by coming even more extreme. So it's in their name. You can deal with them, or you can deal with what causes them. Now, it's not just that. It's not a singular cause, but it's part of it. Like some people say that Trump incited the Capitol riots directly. And then, you can make the claim, what incited Trump was the fact that Hillary Clinton did so-and-so, and then what incited her was so-and-so. So at some point you have to make a decision to stop or to analyze at a particular node in the causal chain. There's also one more point of something from physics called kinetic versus potential energy. So this is something Eric Weinstein brings up to Steven Pinker, who says that the world is getting better. And I also see it as getting extremely, I see it as improving extremely. Eric Weinstein says, yes, you see that in the kinetic sense, but you don't see the potential, which is we can kill ourselves with a button. So that means that even though the far right may, or in fact has killed more, like body count goes to the far right, the far left, you can't discount their potential. And someone needs to analyze it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's also, I know there's also a line Brett Weinstein mentions in the documentary, and I've heard him make this point on his podcast about what the far left will provoke the far right to do, right? So there's a fear of what would happen if the far left were to get their way, but then there's also this other fear of what will the far right do in retribution? What will they be pushed to? How will the existence or the growth of the far left increase the strength and number of the far right, right? So you have this, this back and forth that seems to just feed on itself.
It's already happening. I mean, this is if you look at, just take America for an example. Proud Boys and, all those alt-right and far-right groups, they didn't really have much, they weren't that well organized, but every time, and I believe it's David Shaw, who is a statistician who did the research. He got pilloried for actually announcing that he's a Democratic strategist whose sole aim is to get Democrats elected. He worked for Obama. He put out a data set that shows every time there is a riot, that is a far left riot or a violent protest turning into a violent riot, it gives credence there's absolute data showing the far right's gains on the back of that. For Curt's point, they're reactionary, but not just they're reactionary, it actually gives more people who cannot relate to this end reason to be part of this end, because they feel as, well, if this is what they're doing, we need to protect. Both ends of the spectrum have this idea of pure evil about the other party. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys. That's Darth Vader. We need to save the Republic. Whatever the Hollywood black and white approach, they think about the other.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem in the U.S. right now is, everyone thinks the other person is the enemy. If you say something contradictory to what someone believes, then you must be a white supremacist. That's been an interesting thing for me this past year, just making points among friends. And I've been called white supremacist multiple times in the past year when it's just
welcome to the club.
Yeah.
How do you, well, you've got two brown guys who've been called, I've been called white supremacy adjacent. I haven't been called white supremacist yet, but I've been called the other.
I've been called a white supremacist about a month during January 6th Capitol riots, because I didn't even know they were going on. I was doing a podcast. Someone messaged me and said, "Why aren't you commenting on this?" Then I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. They're like, the fact that you're not commenting and the fact that you're making a film about this means that you agree, and you're something like silence is violence. And then they just blocked me on Facebook. And
that's just, go ahead, Desh.
All right. I want to add one thing, about this sort of otherization. There's this interesting data point from Sri Lanka. So there's a civil war that started in 1981 and finished in 2009, 28-year war. I'm from the majority Sinhalese, and the civil war was between the majority Sinhalese government versus the LTTE, Liberation Tamil Tigers of Elam, and made out of Tamil people. Now, after the war finished, I was part of a group that did a lot of reconciliation work. And one of the things that really made me want to go there and do a lot of work was this data set we found that 70% of Sri Lankans did not have a friend from the other side. And I examined, it's anecdotal, but for me, and I was like, hold on, do I have a Tamil friend? Like somebody who I can call a friend? I know Tamil people, but I don't have a friend. And I realized the school I went to when I was in Sri Lanka, Tamil section was a thing. It was segregated. And they spoke in Tamil, we spoke in Sinhala, and that was the norm, right? And when you otherize a group of people, you really don't see them even remotely as anywhere similar to you, right? And this is what's happening in America, right? Again, the data is very clear. Republicans are, in families, if you're a Republican, that is a greater sin than, I don't know, like if you're a Democratic household and, one of your family members is now a Republican, you are just, scum of the earth. That's it. You're done. Like there is no redeeming quality because you're part of the other. That in the long term, if that level of, polarization continues, that's gonna end up in a really bad place. And it's already showing in America.
Mm-hmm. how important is it that we figure out the race problem? Is that what we should be talking about? Do you see that as the central divide between the left and the right? What needs to be done to bring it together?
Well, one needs to decide what is the race problem. So is the race problem the tensions between the races, or is the race problem that certain races are not given the same amount of wealth or attention? Plenty of the race problem seems to be the perception that there exists a race problem, then that exacerbates the tensions. Like in a relationship, if you think your wife is cheating on you, even if it's in your own head, you can drive her to cheat on you just from your behavior and your attitude and your mistrust. So part of it needs to be an analysis as to what exactly is the race issue and what contributes to it, and how much of it is perception versus real, and how much do those perceptions then engender what's real.
Well, if one were to think in the West, I'm going to speaking not just about America, race is the main problem. I mean, in America, it is presented as it is such a critical issue, but the presentation of the problem versus if you take the time to look at the available data, then there's a disparity, because the data doesn't necessarily support this systemic issue, which is, for example, when Joe Biden said that you cannot, I'm paraphrasing, but he tweeted out something along the lines of, what happened on January 6th, you cannot tell me it wouldn't have, it has nothing to do with race, because if there were a BLM protests, the outcome would have been far more swift. The police would be, basically he's turning it into a race issue, not taking into the account what other variables that may be there at play. For example, the local police, they knew that a group of people were going to protest, so they had a standard set of practices ready to manage an audience of that level. But they also took into consideration a very simple fact that this is the same audience that was saying Blue Lives Matter. So the threat level, they would have identified it to be lesser, right? They didn't take into consideration any race, but here is a practical reality. We all know this is a Blue Lives Matter audience. They're not going to be as violent as a Black Lives Matter protest, which they are out here saying defund the police, fuck the police, etc. So, okay, let's be real about that. So that's one thing they took into consideration. This is not to say there were major lapses, but again, if you purely see this through a lens of race, you can make this into a race issue. But then the member of the public who died was a white woman,
right?
Trump supporter, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm. If it was a black woman,
this issue, you have to be honest about it. If it was a black woman, this would have been a very different. If it was a BLM protest and it was a black woman, the country, all of America would be on fire now, right? So this idea where you racialize every single thing, you're missing some critical elements. BLM protest about the 1% of Black deaths. But if you look at the data, there are a lot more Black deaths that they should be speaking about, but they're not, because whether one like to admit it or not, there is a political ideology governing that. So there are convenient Black deaths that they will protest, but they wouldn't talk about as a whole. Now I'm going to get into a lot of trouble for saying what I just did, but I'm purely coming from a pragmatic, data-driven, logical perspective. This is I'm not saying racism is not an issue. For example, just my personal life. Just the other day, I was out with my partner and my daughter, and there was a group of three white dudes who were parked. We walked by, and there was a group of Indian students that walked by. One of the guys just basically got onto the side of his cars and did these monkey gestures. And, it was purely a racist act. Now, I have to explain that to my 7-year-old, saying, well, what he did, what was pointing at us, was this is what he was trying to achieve. But I don't judge my entire existence in Australia based on that one act. Clearly, you can't look at a broader issue through that one simple lens. I am not minimizing racism as an issue in America. I'm not minimizing any of the individual personal experiences people had with the police or racist people, but trying to look at what is happening through purely a racial lens misses the point. There are a myriad of other variables that is at effect, right? That affect whatever happens, right? If you're just going to look at it from one lens, you're going to miss, and you're going to come up with solutions that will make matters much, much worse. You're going to end up writing a book like Ibrahim Kendi's book and Robin DiAngelo's book. They're intellectually dishonest, narrow points of view that will continue to divide society.
Yeah, and it has the effect, an effect. I think we were getting close to it earlier, of making people who never viewed their world through this lens of race to begin viewing it. And I've experienced this personally. I've had someone else on the podcast talk about their experience with this, where, I grew up my mom is Dominican, so I've spent a lot of time Dominican Republic. I had, Black friends growing up. I've never encountered people of another race in public and had so many doubts about how our interaction would go as I do now. And it feels as though I now am looking at other people of color, and wondering where are they in this whole thing? Do they view me as a bad person just because of how I look? And so now, even though I don't subscribe to the views of DiAngelo and Kendi, I still have to deal with them in my daily life. And it's really a frustrating thing. Do you guys, you're both people of color. I'm sure your experiences is different, but is that something you worry about as well?
I worry, I know this sounds silly. I worry that I'm not gangster enough for most of it sounds racist, but I am racist. This is something else that I came to understand. I am racist and I'm sexist in so many ways. In horrible ways. I can give you some examples. I'll give you some examples later, but it's mainly that I'm not cool enough.
Okay,
I feel I have to give a little bit of a rapper accent.
You need to explain.
Yeah.
What are you talking about, mate?
I'm more likely to lock my car when I see a black person. But I'm also more likely to lock it when I see a brown person but see, here's what's tricky about that, is that if I saw a white person dressed in the same manner, in walking in the same manner, like with a swagger, then I would imagine I would lock it just as swiftly, and I have in the past. So when people say, okay, racism is when given the same scenario, you modify just the race and then you treat one group differently. Well, it's difficult to modify just the race. So what I mean is that, what is the black version of Eric? What is the black version of Desh? Is it the exact same person with the same beard? What is the white version of me? Well, some people might say I'm already white, like I'm accused of, but it's not clear that you can just swap someone's race. Okay, now as for sexism, okay, I think that women are more kind than men. I think women are more empathic. I think men are more aggressive. I think men bear more responsibility for rape than... What I mean is that I don't think it's so strange when some of these people on the extreme left say, teach men not to rape. Because there are small cues that a man wouldn't pick up on. It's more like teach men socialization. Because men are so blunt. We don't read small cues. We don't know that. Well, I'm saying we, but I'm speaking generally. That's what makes me sexist, makes me racist. I think that I'm nicer to black people. That makes me more racist as well, because I feel like I have to overcompensate. I hold the door more readily for a black person. So in many ways I'm racist. In many ways I'm sexist.
Right. Interesting. Well,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't necessarily know if I see the same point of view. For me, I consider myself a student of the School of Hip Hop. When I came to Australia, I didn't fit in anywhere, and where I found a place that I felt comfortable was in the hip hop community. I was a DJ once. I hosted radio shows. I've hosted and toured and spoken to many rappers from America, and I identified the struggle I was going through when my first 5 years in Australia, actually for the first 8 years, were very, very challenging. And I related my struggle to the struggle that I heard through music and through hip hop. So I also have lived my entire life, even like from year 6, as boarding schools and lived away. So I've always lived by myself, and I've never, for me, it never clicks in my head because this person is of this social orientation or this race that should, I should lock my car doors or cross the street or anything like that. Now, there was a time that I knew that I was making some people uncomfortable because of the way I used to dress. I used to have cornrows. I used to have piercings. I used to dress very, street. And I did notice, people not getting into elevators, people, locking cars. I've noticed that people judging based on who I was or their perception of who I was. That is probably a reason that it doesn't happen to me, but I do acknowledge the idea of, there are very clear differences between the two sexes, two genders. I don't know which one is the correct one because I don't want to get into trouble.
Well, okay,
anyway,
we're already in trouble. We're already
riff quickly on Desh and what you said. Yeah, just save myself from some trouble.
Yeah,
Desh,
I think you need to, because I kind of understand where you're getting at, but I think the way you articulate it, I'm not sure that's the way to go. Just because to use something you presented in the movie, there is the familiarity heuristic, right?
Right.
We tend to, again, I ran this experiment myself. Yeah. There was a time where I applied for 52 jobs. I didn't get a response. Actually, I got 2 responses out of the 52 jobs. And I was very qualified for the particular job I was applying for because I had 10 years experience of running events, or 8 years at that point. And I wasn't getting even a junior role. And at that point was the popular study came out all around the world based on your name, whether it's John Smith versus Desh Amila. John Smith will get a response, Desh Amila would not. And I 100% at that point believed it had to be racism the reason. Now, in retrospect, after looking into that particular study with bit more detail, I realized the familiarity heuristic plays quite a important role in that. You go with who you know. And does that make one racist? Right. I don't know. Just Curt, you are people who sort of dress, walk, talk the way you do. You don't associate with certain set of actions. And then there's this other group that things you consume have told you the way they dress may mean Y. Thus, you are doing this. you are stereotyping people. But I don't know. I'm
right.
I'm
Part
just
of
trying to say,
what I'm being is as honest as I possibly can, and I think that more people, if not 99.9, if not every single person, is racist and sexist to the core. They just don't realize it. And now I sound like I'm part of the extreme left. But what I mean by racist, I don't mean that like you're not going to hire someone because they're black. In fact, I'm more likely to hire someone because they're black, because I feel like they've gone through enough and maybe they don't get callbacks, and now I'm poisoned by the extreme left. When it comes to donating to the homeless, I almost never, this sounds horrible, but I almost never donate to a white homeless person because I want to save it for someone who's ethnic. So in that sense, I'm racist, but I don't like to come out and say the benevolent quality of my racism, because that one sounds like, oh, at least you're overcome, so you're being nicer so then you're being a good racist. So I'd rather be honest and give the horrible characteristics up front, because I don't want to delude myself and make it seem like my problem is that I'm too nice. My problem is that I'm too courageous. It's like a job interview.
Yeah,
I'm too loyal. So I didn't want it to seem like that. But also, Desh, sorry, Eric, I know that
no.
Okay, and you're the host, so
this
please.
is about you
just interrupt
guys.
me.
This
But
is
Desh,
about you guys.
what you just did right there, it's like, okay, you used to dress somewhat, let's say, gangsterish. I don't know what else to call it, but let's just call it that. Now,
Sure.
I grew up in Jane and Finch in Toronto, so if anyone knows, that's a brown, black, and Asian community. There's like 5 white people in my grade. Okay. So I'm more familiar with people who are ethnic and more on the gangster oriented. I used to gangster rap actually I used to freestyle rap when I was a teenager. And in some way, and I got beat up quite a few times by brown people and black people, never an Asian person. But brown people and black people. So in a sense, even though I was more familiar with people who had baggy clothing and so on, I would still clutch whatever I had more closely when I encountered them, whether they're black or brown. Now, what I'm saying when I say that I'm racist is that, generally speaking, more black people dress in a gangsterish manner. And this is a gross oversimplification. So then one can make the association that I'm racist or the implication that I'm racist, but and I'm owning up to that. But I may do the same if it was someone brown dressing the same.
I feel like there's a issue with just the word racism and how it's being applied here. Like, is it actually racist to have a preconceived notion about someone based off the signals that they're putting out? Like, we're talking about how someone dresses. You're not really talking about the color of the person. And I know that's a point you tried to make. Like, what would the black Eric be like? What would the white Curt be like? Like, we're not like, I don't know. It seems as though we're redefining racism in the wrong way today. We're trying to make everything racism when we need to figure out this other gray area that's like, I'm not racist. I'm not out in the world saying white supremacy, but sometimes people put out signals that make me feel uncomfortable, and it makes me act a certain
If
way.
anything, I'm for representation. I'm one of the few people who are not on the extreme left that am for representation. And the reason is that Chris Rock once said, I needed to see Eddie Murphy doing stand-up for me to do stand-up, to know that there was a person like me. And there's something to that. You need to see someone else. You need to see an example of someone that you relate to in order for you to feel like that's possible. So representation is not something I have a problem with. And in that sense, I'm racist because I'm saying that I would privilege someone who's gay or someone who is, or trans or Asian or whatever it may be, over someone who is straight and white. So in a sense, I'm racist, but like I struggle with it. I'll just speak for myself. I treat people differently based on income, based on how they're dressed. I treat people differently if they have a different job. Like, I can't help it. I try not to, but it's unconscious and it happens instantly. And I think if people are honest, they may hear what I'm saying and say like, oh, you're such a monster. You're a racist and a bigot and so on. But I think if anyone is honest, they do it too. They cannot help it. If you see Bill Gates, you're not going to say, yo, what up? Like, or you're not just going to go like that. Like it's the regular person you're crossing in the hallway. You might be obsequious, say, oh, hey, or you might just avert your gaze because you don't want to seem like another fan or a sycophantic person. But you treat people differently based on their characteristics. Okay.
Well, I'm not really sure that is necessarily always the case. I don't know. Hey, look, I also feel like there's an element of, and I appreciate you being, honest with your position, but I don't think it should be generalized. There is maybe it's a cultural element. I can't say I do that, and one part could be because, again, I used to do a lot of tours, so I used to hang out with famous people. So I've never felt the need to treat, because somebody's famous, a different way, because I've seen all what's behind the scenes. There's, when they're in front of 10,000 people, the perception of them, the 10,000 people, versus the person who brought the famous person there, put them at the hotel, get them the kind of specialty they want, like all those things. Once you see all of that, for me, I don't see and I don't treat that person any special other than what is contractually obligated for a promoter to do. There is no, just on a personal level, I speak to personally, I speak and interact with people the same level, with the exception of the one time I acted differently around this one person was Bill Murray, because he's Bill Murray.
Right. But you also qualified it by saying that you have familiarity with those people, that you know what they're like.
Yeah. I mean,
them backstage,
but sure, but that then applies to every celebrity I've ever come across, whether it's Bill Gates, Elon Musk, or somebody that has a much smaller audience. Because once you understand that, then
right. Once you understand it, but not everyone understands it. Not everyone has anywhere near the access like you.
Fair enough. That qualifier may be the case, but anyway, I think we are stuck in
right.
matter for too long. Let's move on, Eric. Yeah. I'm sure you have other things you want to talk about.
No, that was great. I'm glad we went down that rabbit hole for a little bit.
We sure did.
Part of this is also that me and Desh disagree, and we disagree on quite a bit, and yet we still agree that one should communicate despite disagreement, and that's one of the main reasons he signed on for the project.
Absolutely, and this is an
walk the walk.
Yeah, and this is somehow an unusual thing. Like, you can see, Eric, like anyone who's listening to this podcast, you can see Curt and I, we disagree on many things. I mean, there's still a letter that Curt's written on letter.wiki. I haven't responded, which I need to. We can clearly, when I respond, you'll see how many things we disagree, but that's besides the point. I have no issue with Curt as a person. I have many disagreements with the ideas that the person Curt holds. I am able to, have that, separation and go as, without physically hurting, going to that level. We can have this verbal battle as much as we want, but that shouldn't take away from our ability to be humane to each other. And I think that's the crucial part that's missing. And just like Curt said, that's one of the reasons I am happy to put my name and produce this movie and do it. I know by associating with him, some people will, associating with certain people in the film and Curt, some people are going to accuse me as somehow that is an endorsement of me agreeing with everything they say. This idea of guilty by association is just, I can't believe people take that very seriously. I've seen people going after Steven Pinker because there's some photos of him with some questionable people. That shouldn't take away from any of his ideas, any of his intellectual work. So yeah, that you'll work out about. So apologies that we are talking like we don't agree with, but yes, because we don't agree, that doesn't mean we don't like each other.
Yeah, I think that's huge, and that it's good to see that live example here, personally, even. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think makes it so hard for people today to separate a person from their ideas and to treat people with respect, regardless of what they believe? And is this something that's limited to the extreme sides, or do you see this happening in your experiences with moderate people?
I think we're at a point in especially in the West. Actually, this is I think maybe this is quite universal. People's ideas define them as a person. So when somebody attacks your idea, they take it as you're attacking their personhood. This is why I made it a point to say what I just did. Like in the last movie, Islam and the Future of Tolerance, one of the points we make very early is, people, this is a very simple distinction. A Muslim person versus Islam, the ideology they believe. People use that interchangeably, thinking it is the same thing. Now, for a lot of people, they'll be like, of course, they're two different things. But, if you're, say, somebody from Pakistan, where the country, the origins of the country is based, and it is deeply tied to the religion. So there is no separation. So I feel as more and more people now are so tied to the ideas they believe in, it's hard for them to separate. So, I think it's why people are finding it hard to have these conversations, because they are misunderstanding me challenging their idea as me challenging their personhood.
Do you have anything to add, Curt?
No, not that I can say quickly.
Well, maybe you guys can key me into how you got to the place where you're able to work together on a documentary with someone with whom you disagree with so frequently. And as you mentioned, Desh, your work on Islam and the Future of Tolerance was based around two people who disagreed. Were you guys always like this? Is this a skill you've developed? How did you get to this place?
I'm a strong proponent of, if you want the world to be a certain way, then you have to act in that way. So, for example, if you want easy example, if you want others to not be racist, then don't be racist. If you want others to not view you as ugly when you're older, then you don't view older people as ugly. If you want to be respected when you're older, then you respect the elderly right now. So if I want other people to talk to other people despite what they may think of the other person, despite their ideas generally, then I have to do the same. So that's that.
I think for me, it really hit home after that example I provided you in 2009, when the Civil War ended, when I realized the problem that I had in my life with regards to my country's issue, because the result of that was 100,000 plus people from my country, my people, perished. And part of that was a failure of conversation. So I make it a point to have conversations with people I disagree, and I encourage people to do so in a way that Curt put it. I want to do the thing that I want other people to do. I made Islam and the Future of Tolerance. I held a controversial event about feminism. Now I made Better Left Unsaid with Curt, where although we disagree, and there's this amazing documentary that inspired this whole journey for me, Best of Enemies. It's this debate series that happened, I think, I'd like to say 60s, between the political left,
Gore Vidal, right?
Intellectual Gore Vidal, and the political rights intellectual William L. Buckley. Those conversations they had were just intellectually it's so interesting. And they disagreed with each other so much, but it was so fascinating to just watch. But they managed to do it. They went across the country doing that. You can imagine what happened behind the scenes. They could easily have a drink and just respect each other as people. That is the kind of world I want to live in. I want to be able to talk to people that I fundamentally disagree with. And for us, in this movie, we had a baseline that we agreed on. And I think that's important for conversations. If you're truly interested in moving the conversation forward, you need to have a baseline you agree on. With Islam and the Future of Tolerance, with Sam and Maajid, the reason they could move that conversation forward was they agreed on the, to quote unquote, Maajid, Nawaz, the Islam problem. Here we have a problem in the West right now. Here's the problem. Now let's talk about it. So Curt and I agreed there is a problem here with the far left and its implications to the West. So we based, that baseline is there. And from there on, how we go about it, there are many things, as you witnessed, we disagree on. But that doesn't matter, because we have this foundation.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Do you guys worry at all that this documentary will have an adverse effect and push people on the fringe, on the left, further left, and make them more combative? Do you think there's any chance this could have a negative impact?
I'll give you an example. So when I made Islam and the Future of Tolerance, one of the things that people told me was, don't you worry, this will give the far right the ammo they need and make life for people who believe in Islam much difficult. And my answer might be a little bit of a throwaway kind of answer, but I didn't mean it, which is even this film, the amount of research and thought that's gone into this movie and the way this is delivered, it is complicated and it is way too intellectual for someone to just try to whittle the entire movie down to a soundbite. This is if you really watch the movie and gone through from the beginning to end, you're going to have a hard time saying that this is just propaganda from one side, because it isn't.
I'll give a facetious answer, and that's that the people on the extreme left won't watch it, but they'll comment about it, so it's not going to change their view.
Yeah, I'm
Same
sure you
with the
guys.
extreme right.
I don't know, mate. I think some of them will be curious enough to watch this because we do have some of the intellectual heroes in this movie, and that will give them enough to suffer through it. And then hopefully during that journey, there may be a moment that they think, I didn't know that. Because that's, for me, I have, before we agreed on the final cut, I did send this movie to a number of people, and a couple of them I would consider they have very Marxist views, and they, one of them considered themselves a socialist. So it was very difficult for them to watch, but they know who me as a person, so they gave me the respect to watch it. And one of them absolutely disliked the movie and didn't want me to associate with it. A bit too late. But the point is, the other person, though, didn't know certain bits of information we put out there, and it got them thinking. Now, it hasn't fundamentally moved them, but it has gotten them thinking. And I feel like over time, they're going to start seeing certain patterns based on the information they gathered from the movie. And their change won't happen overnight. It'll happen over time.
Right. That's absolutely right. People underestimate how big of a change a small change in the short term can make in the long term. And some people are like, well, this changed your view. How did this debate change your... And you walk away from most debates, or most people walk away from most debates equally as confused and not taking one side or the other. But then they find out, or even if they were on one side, they feel like their views haven't changed. But then maybe a month later, you realize that created a chink in their armor, which slowly separated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Helping people. I like the idea of helping people recognize patterns that they maybe weren't seeing before. And, I talked with a guy, Anthony Magnabosco, for this podcast, and he practices a thing called street epistemology, where he talks to strangers on the street and asks them questions about core beliefs that they hold. And it's really a Socratic dialogue where he's just asking questions. He's not inputting his philosophy at all. But a lot of times people will walk away and leave comments on his videos saying, I never thought about that. And the goal is really to get them thinking about what their beliefs are based on, not to get them to change them right away, but to help them see the foundations of their belief and to be a better critic of that foundation. Yeah, is there anything you guys want to end on? I guess just for me real quick, I'd highly suggest anyone who's listening to this, watch the film Better Left Unsaid. Watched it twice myself. And yeah, is there anything you guys want to add?
I just want to add that the movie will be available to the public. I'm not sure when this podcast is coming out. You can edit this part out as need be. The movie will be available on iTunes, Vudu, Amazon, and Google Play. It's also available on betterleftunsaidfilm.com. If you go to the website and watch it directly from the website, you'll have the opportunity to also watch the director's cut, which has an extra, I believe, about half an hour worth of
material
content. It is, again, if you want to dig deeper, I recommend your second viewing should definitely be the director's cut. It will elaborate on bits and pieces you missed out on. But thank you for having us. Thank you for having these conversations. Thank you for helping us make these kind of movies, because by you having this conversation, you're normalizing this kind of behavior. I want to, again, paraphrase something Maajid Nawaz said. So that film, before the film Islam and the Future of Tolerance was made, we ran a tour in Australia. This was at the height of, people were dying for drawing a cartoon of Muhammad. So security was at its highest. We had threats. We had a threat from somebody who was an Australian who went to Syria to fight with ISIS, directly commenting on Maajid Nawaz and what will happen to him if he continues these events. I believe the final event was in Sydney, and we had the Secret Service, the Australian Federal Police coming into with dogs sniffing out if there were going to be bombs there. People had to walk through metal detectors. I know it's different in America, but over here, people don't walk around with guns. So that was an unusual experience. And then when the street was barricaded, there were so many security guards with actual guns, which is not something you see. And then there was an entire police station just there at the venue. And when people eventually came in and witnessed the event, what something Maajid said was, you help spread the what could have been just I was the only target, or Sam Harris was the only target, but now there's 2,500 of us here. It's harder to now come after every single one of us when you spread the threat of violence, when you normalize these kind of conversations. So I just want to say thank you, mate, for doing this, giving us a platform, and letting your audience know that this film exists and they shouldn't be scared to watch it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, man. Thank you, Eric. I admire what you were able to do, where you were part of one of the extremes and you've managed to temper yourself, as well as that you managed to watch the movie twice. Not that it's a slog, nice. But that you were uncomfortable with it and you still watched it again. That means, not only does it mean a lot to me, it's demonstrative of your character. So kudos to you, man.
Word. I appreciate that. It's really an honor to speak with you guys. Definitely a big fan. I will be keeping my eye out for future projects for sure and spreading the word on this one.